They said she wouldn't survive the winter. Not in that valley where the snow buried cabins like graves and the wind howled. Like wolves through the canyons. Not with her thin frame, her patched dress, and her spirit that seemed as brittle as frozen glass. But those people had never seen the fire hidden inside. Her eyes are the way fate sometimes plants strength in the hearts of the most unlikely souls. And on the night when the storm came down from the mountains, blotting out the stars and swallowing the land whole, she stood at the doorway of her cabin with fear pressing against her ribs in silence, heavier than the snow itself, wondering if all the cruel whispers from town would prove true, until the sound of boots crunching across the frozen ground broke the silence. And there he was, the cowboy with the weather-beaten face and eyes as steady as the horizon, his coat dusted white with snow, his hand resting near the worn holster that had carried him through wars, trails and losses too heavy to count. And when he looked at her shivering frame, he didn't see weakness. He didn't see a girl the winter would claim. He saw someone worth fighting for, worth saving, worth keeping alive. And with a voice roughened by cold nights and long rides, he said the words that would etch themselves into her soul forever. Not if I can help it. From that moment forward, the air around her seemed to change. Not warmer exactly, but charged, alive with the sense that survival was no longer her burden alone, that someone had stepped into the storm beside her. And when he crossed the threshold into the cabin, stomping snow from his boots, the firelight caught his face, showing the years of grit, struggle and hard choices, but also a kind of unshakable determination that no frost could extinguish. And he began right away, checking the firewood pile, securing the shutters against the howling wind, tossing his saddlebag onto the rough-hewn table and pulling out supplies she had never dared to hope for: flour, salt, jerky, a coil of rope, and even a flask of strong coffee that smelled like heaven itself. And she stood there stunned, watching this man move as if he had carried the weight of winters all his life, as if keeping her alive was simply the next trail he had to ride. Yet survival is never just about supplies. It is about courage, and in those long nights that followed, while the storm raged like a beast outside and the temperature dropped so low the windows iced from the inside, he taught her how to hold on, how to keep moving, how to believe that tomorrow was possible. And when despair crept into her thoughts, whispering that she was cursed, that the cold would take her the way it had taken her father, her mother, and every scrap of safety she had ever known, he would shake his head, stoke the fire higher, and say, "No curse is stronger than a will to fight." Slowly she began to feel it too, that fight rising in her chest. And though her hands shook as she chopped wood under his guidance, though her lungs burned when he made her shovel paths through the snow so they wouldn't be trapped, though her body ached and her heart wanted to quit, she saw him watching her, nodding once, silent approval in his eyes, and it lit something inside her brighter than the fire itself. Days stretched into weeks, the valley buried deeper and deeper, but together they carved out survival, melting snow for water, stretching meals with ingenuity, and telling stories by firelight. When the walls groaned with wind and loneliness tried to creep back in, sometimes he spoke of the plains, of wild horses running free, of sunrises that painted the sky with hope, and sometimes he spoke of nothing at all, simply sitting beside her with the quiet weight of a protector, someone who had chosen to stay when the whole town had written her off as doomed. It wasn't just the cabin he was shoring up against the storm. It was her spirit, her belief that maybe she wasn't destined to perish forgotten in some snowbound corner of the earth. The townsfolk whispered, "She'll never last." But when spring finally began to tease its way across the land, dripping icicles from the eaves and sending birds back into the skies, they saw her walk into town not alone, not broken, but standing beside the cowboy, her head high, her eyes steady, her frame stronger, her steps carrying the weight of a girl who had faced death and refused to bow. They said she wouldn't survive winter, but she had. Because sometimes all it takes is one hand stretched out in the storm, one voice refusing to give up, one cowboy who looks the cold in the eye and says, "Not if I can help it." And my friend, that is the story not just of a girl and a cowboy, but of every one of us when the world says we won't make it, when voices whisper that we're too weak, too cursed, too small to survive the winters in our own lives. Because deep down there's always a spark waiting for someone, or maybe for ourselves, to breathe it into flame. If you felt that fire rise in you as you listened, if you believe in courage, resilience, and stories that remind us what it means to fight against impossible odds, then stay with us, because this channel is where stories live. where hope is reignited and where no winter is too strong for the spirit of survival. Make sure you subscribe right now, because the next story might be the one that carries you through your own storm.